Praise the Lord. This is Brother Parrott again, and coming to you today, bringing you the Word of God and continuing our study. We're continuing our study in the United Kingdom stage, and we left off with the Psalms, and we last covered the imprecatory Psalms, which were Psalms 35, 55, 58, 59, 69, 83, 109, 137, and 140. But we were in the United Kingdom stage, and the United Kingdom stage had three kings. One was Saul, the first one. One was David, and then the great wisest man, except for our Lord, that ever lived, is the man named Solomon. And we left off with the degree or accent psalms. Who wrote them? A commonly held theory is that they were composed by three men. Hezekiah wrote 10 of them. Psalm 120, 121, 123, 125, 126, 128, 129, 130, 132, and 134, and that Solomon wrote one of them, 127. That David wrote 4 of them, Psalm 122, 124, 131, and 133. Why were they written? Many believe it was because of the following. Around 7 BC, God healed a Judean king named Hezekiah of a fatal illness. Isaiah chapter 38 records the prayer of thanksgiving of the grateful king composed after his recovery. In verse 20 he exclaims, "The Lord was ready to save me, therefore will we sing my songs to the string instruments all the days of our life in the house of the Lord." Some scholars, including Thurtle, Lightfoot, Scroggie, believe that these songs of Hezekiah are the 10 anonymous songs of degrees in the group of 15, Psalm 120 through Psalm 134. These psalms do have a certain similarity of style. Hezekiah may have written 10 of these anonymous degree psalms in memory of the 10 steps of the shadow on the sundial in 2 Kings chapter 20, verse 9 through 11. And then added 5 appropriate hitherto unpublished psalms from the pen of David and Solomon, see Proverbs 25, verse 1, to bring the total to 15 in honor of the 15 years God added to his life. See 2 Kings chapter 21, verse 6. How were they to be sung? There are various theories. An old Jewish tradition explains that they were sung when the choir ascended the semicircular flight of stairs leading up to the court of men in the temple. Number 2, the accents may have referred to the stages of pilgrimage to Jerusalem to be sung along the way by travelers en route to the various annual feast days. Number 3, accent means a song in the higher choir, the singer being on the stairs of some high place. Number 4, the reference may be musical, signifying that the notes rose by degrees in succession. The Hallel or Hallelujah Psalms, Psalm 113 through Psalm 118. These 6 psalms were sung on the night of the Passover. Psalm 113 and 14 at the beginning of the meal, Psalm 115 and 116 at the close. They were sung by the Savior and his disciples in Matthew 26, verse 30. They are still recited in Palestine 18 times a year at various occasions, and 21 times yearly by those Jews outside the Holy Land. The historical Psalms, Psalm 78, 105, and 106. These 3 psalms, which depict the history of Israel, may be summarized as follows. A. The sins of Israel. They refused to walk in God's law, Psalm 78, verse 10. They forgot his works, Psalm 78, verse 11, verse 42, and Psalm 106, verse 13. That's number 2. Number 3, they spoke against him, Psalm 78, verse 19. Number 4, they did not trust his salvation, Psalm 78, verse 22. 5, they lied to him, Psalm 78, verse 36. 6, they grieved him, Psalm 78, verse 40. 7, they limited him, Psalm 78, verse 41. 8, they worshiped graven images, Psalm 78, verse 58, and 106, verse 19. They envied, number 9, they envied his leader Moses, Psalm 106, verse 16. 10, they despised the promised land, Psalm 106, verse 24. 11, they murmured in their tents, Psalm 106, verse 25. Number 12, they ate the sacrifices of the dead, Psalm 106, verse 28. 13, they mingled among the heathen, Psalm 106, verse 35. And 14, they sacrificed their sons and daughters to devils, Psalm 106, verse 37. Number 15, they shed innocent blood, Psalm 106, verse 38. That was the sins of Israel. And B, the grace of God. Number 1, he remembered his covenant when they cried unto him, Psalm 105, verse 8 through 11. Number 2, he divided the sea, Psalm 78, verse 13. Number 3, he led them with a cloud by day, Psalm 78, verse 14. 4, he led them with a fire by night, Psalm 78, verse 14. Number 5, he provided water for them out of rocks, Psalm 78, verse 15. Number 6, he rained manna down for them, Psalm 78, verse 24. Number 7, he was full of compassion and forgave their iniquity, Psalm 78, verse 38. Number 8, he wrought signs for them in Egypt, Psalm 78, verse 43, and 105, verse 27 through 36. Number 9, he brought them to the border of the promised land, Psalm 78, verse 54. Number 10, he cast out the heathen before them, Psalm 78, verse 55. Number 11, he chose David to lead them, Psalm 78, verse 70 and 71. 12, he allowed no man to hurt them, Psalm 105, verse 14. Number 13, he fed them, Psalm 78, verse 72. Number 14, he reproved kings for their sakes, Psalm 105, verse 14. Number 15, he elevated them through Joseph, Psalm 105, verse 17. Number 16, he gave them the riches of Egypt, Psalm 105, verse 37. Number 17, he kept them all strong, Psalm 105, verse 37. Number 18, he continually forgave them, Psalm 106, verse 43. And 19, he continually heard their cry, Psalm 106, verse 44. The acrostic psalms, Psalms 9, 10, 25, 34, 37, 111, 112, 119, and 145. These 9 psalms are also called the alphabetical psalms. This is so because each line of these psalms begins with a successive letter of the 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. Psalm 119 is, of course, the most famous of the acrostic psalms. It has 22 stanzas. Each stanza has 8 verses for a total of 176. Each of these stanzas begins with one of the 22 Hebrew letters. Not all of these psalms are complete in this arrangement. That is, some are missing a letter or more. Thus we find A, Psalm 9, 10, and 25 are missing several letters. B, Psalm 34 and 45 have all but one letter. C, Psalms 37, 111, 112, and 119 have all the letters. It is reasonable to suppose that the acrostic device was designed to assist the memory. The Messianic Psalms. We shall consider these all-important psalms in a twofold manner. First, in the order that Christ fulfilled them in the New Testament. Second, in the order that they appear in the book of the Psalms. A, in the order that Christ fulfilled them in the New Testament. Number 1, his obedience. Psalm 46, verse 6 through 10. Sacrifice and offering thou didst not desire. Then said I, Lo, I come in the volume of the book. It is written of me. Compare Hebrews 10, verse 5 through 7. His zeal. Psalm 69, verse 9. The zeal of thine house hath eaten me up. See John 2, verse 17. His rejection, number 3. Psalm 118, verse 22. The stone which the builders refused is become the headstone of the corner. Matthew 21 verse 42. His betrayal. Yea, my own familiar friend in whom I trusted, which did eat of my bread, hath lifted up his heel against me. Psalm 41 verse 9. For it was not an enemy that reproached me, then I could have borne it. Neither was it he that hated me that did magnify himself against me, but it was thou, a man my equal, my guide and mine acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together and walked into the house of God in company. Psalm 55, verse 12 through 14. See Matthew 26, verse 14 through 16, and verse 21 through 25. His sufferings. Psalm 22, verse 1, 6 through 8, and 16 and 18 verses. They gave me also gall for my meat, and in my thirst they gave me vinegar to drink. Psalm 69, 21. Matthew also 27 verse 34 and verse 48. Into thine hand I commend my spirit, or commit my spirit. Psalm 31 verse 5 and Luke 23 verse 46. He keepeth all his bones, none of them is broken. Psalm 34 verse 20. John 19 verse 33 through 36, and also Psalm 190, 129 verse 3. His false witnesses. For the mouth of the wicked and the mouth of the deceitful are opened against me. They have spoken against me with a lying tongue. They compass me about also with words of hatred, and fought against me without a cause. Psalm 109 verse 2 and verse 3, and Matthew 26 verse 59 through 61, and 27 verse 39 through 44. His prayers for his enemies. In return for my love, they are my adversaries, but I give myself unto prayer. Psalm 109, verse 4. Luke 23, verse 34. His resurrection. For thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption. Psalm 16, verse 10. Acts 13, verse 35. I will declare thy name unto my brethren. In the midst of the congregation will I praise thee. Psalm 22, verse 22, and St. John 20, verse 17. His ascension. Thou hast ascended on high. Thou hast led captivity captive. Thou hast received gifts for men. Psalm 68, verse 18, and Ephesians 4, verse 8. His triumphal entry. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, and be ye lifted up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Psalm 24, verse 7 and 8, and Acts chapter 1. His high priestly work. The Lord has sworn and will not repent. Thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Psalm 110, verse 4, and Hebrews chapter 5 through chapter 7. His marriage. Psalm 45, verse 2, verse 6, verse 8, verse 13, verse 15, and Revelation chapter 19. His destruction of the heathen. The Lord said unto me, the Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou at my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool. Psalm 110, verse 1. See also Psalms 2. He shall judge among the heathen. Psalm 110, verse 6, and Revelation chapter 6 through chapter 19. His millennial reign. Psalm 89, verse 27, and 102, verse 16 through 21. Excuse me. Thou makest him to have dominion over the works of thy hands. Thou hast put all things under his feet. Psalm 8, verse 6, Hebrews chapter 2. His name shall endure forever. His name shall be continued as long as the sun, and men shall be blessed in him. All nations shall call him blessed. Psalm 72, verse 17, Matthew 23, verse 39, and Revelation 11, verse 15. In the order they appear in the book of Psalms, in Psalms 2, predicts the tribulation, destruction of the heathen, and the millennial reign of Christ. This psalm is in 4 parts. A, the rebellion of man, verse 1 through 3. B, the reaction of God, verse 4 through 6. C, the rule of the Son, verse 7 through 9. And D, the recommendation of the psalmist in verse 10 through 12. Messianic passages, verse 2. The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. It's quoted in Acts chapter 4, 26 also. And in verse 7, I will declare the decree. The Lord has said unto me, Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee. Quoted in Acts 13, verse 33. Psalms chapter 8 predicts the millennial reign of Christ. One may well compare this statement in the Psalm in verse 6, which says it took God's fingers to create man, with Isaiah 53, verse 1, where we are told it took his arms to redeem us. Thus, salvation is definitely more costly than creation. Messianic passage, verse 6, Thou madest him to have dominion over the works of thy hands. Thou hast put all things under his feet. Psalm 16 predicts the death and resurrection of Christ. The Messianic passage, verse 10, For thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption. This was quoted in Acts chapter 2, verse 27. Psalm chapter 22 predicts the intense sufferings of Christ. The psalm is in two parts. A, the sob of the crucified, verse 1 through 21. B, the song of the glorified, chapter 22, verse 22 through 31. It has been suggested that Peter had this psalm in mind when he wrote 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 10 and 11, of which salvation that prophets have inquired and searched diligently, who prophesied of the grace that should come unto you, searching what manner of time the Spirit of Christ which was in them did signify, when it testified beforehand of the sufferings of Christ and the glory that should follow. If this is true, then verses 1 through 21 of chapter 22 of Psalms speak of the sufferings, while verse 22 through 31 depict the glory. The Messianic passages, verse 1, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? It was quoted by Christ in Matthew 27, verse 46. Verse 8, he trusted in the Lord that he would deliver him. Let him deliver him, seeing he delighted in him. Quoted by the wicked Israelite rulers at the cross, Matthew 27, verse 43. Verse 16, they pierced my hands and my feet, fulfilled by the Roman soldiers at the cross in Matthew 27, verse 35. Verse 18, they part my garments among them and cast lots upon my vesture, fulfilled by the Roman soldiers at the cross in Mark 15, verse 24. Verse 22, I will declare thy name unto my brethren. In the midst of the congregation will I praise thee, quoted in Hebrew 2, verse 12. Psalm 23 depicts the tender shepherding ministry of Christ. Messianic passage, verse 1. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. All this exact quotation does not appear in the New Testament. It is nevertheless referred to by the Lord Jesus in St. John chapter 10, verse 1 through 18. This is known as the Pearl of the Psalms. It is in three parts. A, the sheep and the shepherd, verse 1 through 3, speaks of provision. B, the guide and the traveler, verse 3 and 4, speaks of direction. And C, the host and the guest, 5 and 6, speak of communion. Psalm 24 predicts Christ's triumphal entry into heaven. This psalm, although originally written to celebrate David's entrance into the newly captured city of Jerusalem and his subsequent inauguration as king, may also speak of the victorious entry of the Savior into glory after he had finished his work of redemption and descended into the from the Mount of Olives. This psalm was sung by the two choirs. A, verse 1 through 6 were sung at the foot of the hill on which Jerusalem stood. Number 1, choir A would sing verse 1 through 3, and choir B would sing verses 4 through 6. And B, verses 7 through 10 of the 24th Psalm were sung in the front of the gates of the city. Number 1, choir A would sing verse 7. Choir B would sing the first part of verse 8. Number 3, choir A would sing the second part of verse 8. 4, choir A would sing verse 9. And 5, choir B would sing the first part of verse 10. 6, choir A would sing the second part of verse 10. And C, the certain psalms were sung at the morning service in the temple worship each day of the week. Number 1, on Monday the choir sang Psalm 48, thus each day as follows. Number 2, Tuesday, Psalm 82, Wednesday, Psalm 94, Thursday, Psalm 81, Friday, Psalm 93, Saturday, Psalm 92, and Sunday, Psalm 24. Messianic passage, verse 7 through 10. Lift ye up your heads, O ye gates, and be ye lift up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. The Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, and lift them up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. Although these verses are not directly quoted in the New Testament, they are nevertheless generally spoken of in Acts chapter 2, verse 32 and 33. Psalm 31 predicts the Savior's thoughts and words on the cross. Messianic passage. Verse 5, Into thy hands I commit my spirit. This was directly quoted by Jesus just prior to his death on Calvary. Luke 23, verse 46. The Apostle Paul would later refer to verse 19 of the Psalm in 1 Corinthians 2, verse 9. Psalm 40 predicts the obedience of Christ while on the earth. Messianic message. Verse 6, Sacrifice and offering thou didst not desire, my ears as thou open. Quoted in Hebrews 10, verse 5 and 6. Verse 7, Then said I, Lo, I come in the volume of the book, it is written of me. Quoted in Hebrews 10, verse 7. Psalm 41 predicts the betrayal of the Savior by Judas. This is the first of three psalms which speak of that treachery. The others are Psalm 55 and Psalm 109. Messianic passage, verse 9. Yea, my own familiar friend in whom I trusted, which did eat of my bread, hath lifted up his heel against me. See John 13, verse 18. Psalm 45 predicts the beauty and marriage of Christ. This psalm probably had its historical roots in Solomon's marriage to the king of Egypt's daughter in 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 1, but it certainly lends itself to the marriage of Christ passage in Revelation 19, verse 7 through 9. Where it says, Let us be glad and rejoice and give honor unto him, for the marriage of the Lamb is come, and his wife hath made herself ready. And it was granted unto her that she should be arrayed in fine linen, clean and white, for the fine linen is the righteousness of the saints. This psalm is in two parts. Part 1, the characteristics of the bridegroom, 1 through 8a. Number 1, he is the fairest of all. His words are filled with grace. He enjoys the fullest possible blessings of God. He is defender of truth, humility, and justice. He defeats all his enemies. His throne will exist forever. His justice is his royal scepter. He loves the good and hates the wrong. His robes are perfumed with myrrh, aloes, and cassia. And in part 2, the privileges of the bride, 8b through verse 17. She will live in an ivory palace filled with lovely music. She will be fitted with the finest of clothing and most costly jewelry. She will be loved throughout all eternity by her bridegroom. The messianic passage. Verse 6, Thy throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of thy kingdom is a right scepter, quoted in Hebrews chapter 1, verse 8. Verse 7, Thou lovest righteousness and hatest wickedness, therefore God, thy God, hath anointed thee with the oil of gladness above thy fellows, quoted in Hebrews chapter 1, verse 9. Psalm 68 predicts the glorious victory of Christ and his triumphal entry into heaven. Messianic passage. Verse 18, Thou hast ascended on high. Thou hast led captivity captive. Thou hast received gifts from men. Quoted in Ephesians 4, verse 8. Where was the abode of the departed righteous prior to Calvary? It is held by a number of Bible students that before Jesus died, the souls of all men descended into an abode located somewhere in the earth known as Hades in the New Testament and Sheol in the Old Testament. Originally, there were two sections of Hades, one of the saved and one for the lost. The saved section is sometimes called paradise, Luke 23, verse 43, and others referred to as Abraham's bosom at other times. This same compartment is referred to as Abraham's bosom. Luke 16, verse 22. There is no name given for the unsaved section apart from the general designation of Hades. In Luke 16, verse 19 through 31, the Savior relates the account of a poor believer who died and went to the unsaved section. However, many believe that all this changed after Christ made full payment for the believer's sins on Calvary. The Schofield Bible suggests that during the time of his death and resurrection, our Lord descended into Hades, depopulated paradise, and led a spiritual triumphal entry into the heavenlies with all the saved up to that time. Ephesians 4, verse 8 through 10 is offered as the proof of this. In his book Revelation, the late Dr. Barnhouse writes, When he ascended on high, Ephesians 4, verse 8, he emptied the hell of paradise and took it straight to the presence of God. Captivity was taken captive. From that moment onward, there was to be no separation whatsoever for those who would believe in Christ. The gates of hell would never more prevail against any believer. Matthew 16, verse 18. So there were two compartments of hell, and the poor beggar died, and he went to paradise, the same place as the thief went. And the rich man, when he died, went to hell, and he was in torment. And the scripture said in one place in the book of Ezekiel that they were comforted in the nether parts of the earth. They had water there, etc. Psalm 69 predicts the zeal and suffering of Christ. The Messianic passage, verse 9, "For the zeal of thine house hath eaten me up." John 2:17 was quoted. Verse 21, they gave me also gall from my meat, and in my thirst they gave me vinegar to drink, fulfilled in Matthew 27, verse 34 and verse 38. Psalm 72 predicts the millennial reign of Christ. It is not absolutely certain whether this psalm is a prayer of Solomon to God or a prayer of David concerning Solomon. At any rate, it vividly describes the glorious millennial reign of David's greater son, the Lord Jesus Christ. Note the following characteristics of his reign. The poor will receive righteousness, verse 2. The mountains and hills will flourish, verse 3. All oppressors will be crushed, verse 4. His rule will be as gentle and fruitful as the springtime rains upon the grass, verse 6. All good men will prosper exceedingly, verse 7. His reign will extend to the ends of the earth, verse 8. All nations will give him gifts and serve him, verse 10 and verse 11. All people will bless and praise him, verse 15. His name will be honored and will continue forever, verse 17. Messianic passage, verse 8. He shall have dominion also from sea to sea, and from the river unto the ends of the earth, referred to by John in Revelation 11, verse 15. Psalm 89 predicts the unchanging faithfulness of God upon David's dynasty through Christ in spite of continued disobedience within this dynasty. This psalm was written by Ethan the Ephraite, who was a noted wise man during Solomon's reign, 1 Kings 4, verse 31. While we cannot be certain, the psalm may express the thoughts of Solomon during his latter years when, because of his sin, he underwent hard times. See 1 Kings chapter 11. Messianic passage, verse 27. Also I will make him my firstborn higher than the kings of the earth, referred to by Paul in Philippians 2, verse 5 through 11. Psalm 102 predicts the eternality of Christ. This psalm may be assigned to the closing years of the Babylonian exile, and its design was to encourage the Jews to return and rebuild Jerusalem. It also refers to the second coming of Jerusalem's great king. See verse 16. Messianic passage, verse 25 through 27. Of old hast thou laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of thy hands. They shall perish, but thou shalt endure. Yea, all of them shall wax old like a garment, and as a vesture shalt thou change them, and they shall be changed. But thou art the same, and thy years shall have no end. Quoted in Hebrews chapter 1, verse 10 through 12. Psalm 109 predicts the betrayal of Judas and his frightful punishment. Messianic passage, verse 8. Let his days be few, and let another take his office. Quoted in Acts chapter 1, verse 20 by Peter. Psalm 110 predicts the eternal priesthood of Christ. Note the fivefold description of Christ in this psalm. He is God, verse 1. He is king, verse 2. He is priest, verse 4. He is judge, verse 6. He is a mighty warrior, verse 6. Note the twofold description of Christ's people in the psalm. They are priests. Thy people shall be willing. Literally, they shall offer up freely offerings. Compare with Revelation 1, verse 6. Number 2, they are soldiers. In the day of thy power, literally, thy army. Compare with Ephesians 6, verse 11. Messianic passage. Verse 1, the Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou at my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool. This verse is quoted more times in the New Testament than in any other single Old Testament verse. On at least 4 occasions it is repeated. Matthew 22, verse 41 through 46, to point out the deity of Christ. And number 4 in Acts 2:34 in verse 35 to point out the identity of Christ. Hebrews 1 verse 13 as a question to point out the superiority of Christ. And then Hebrews chapter 10 verse 12 and 13 to point out the finished work of Christ. Verse 4. The Lord has sworn and will not repent. Thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. This verse is found no less than 3 times in the New Testament, and all 3 deal with the high priesthood. Number 7. In Hebrews chapter 5 verse 6, to give the qualifications of the high priesthood after the order of Melchizedek. In verse number 8, in Hebrews 6 verse 20, to give the immutability of the high priesthood. And then 9, in Hebrews chapter 7 verse 21, to give the necessity for the high priesthood. Psalm 118 predicts Christ to be the vital stone in God's building, rejected by men, but chosen by the Lord. This psalm, often used during the Feast of Tabernacles, may have been sung by our Savior en route to Gethsemane. Messianic passage, verse 22. The stone which the builders refused has become the headstone of the corner. This supreme stone of the Scriptures is referred to in many Old Testament and New Testament passages. It is the cornerstone. Matthew 21 verse 42 and Ephesians 2 verse 20. It is the headstone, Zechariah 4 verse 7, Acts 4 verse 11. The smitten stone, 1 Corinthians 10:4. The stumbling stone, 1 Corinthians 1:23. The crushing stone, Daniel 2 verse 34. It is the living stone, chosen and precious, 1 Peter 2 verse 4 through 7. Verse 26, Psalms 118. Blessed be he that cometh in the name of the Lord, quoted by the triumphal entry crowd in Matthew 21 verse 9. And also going to be quoted again when Jesus comes back from the heavens to save Israel, when they say, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord, when they're actually running from the Antichrist, and the Antichrist is about to destroy them. In conclusion, this section, here are a few suggested names and titles for some of the Psalms. The Psalm of the Godly Man, number 1, Psalms 1. Psalms of Creation, Psalms 8 and 104. The Good Shepherd Psalm, Psalm 23 and Psalm 22. The Good Shepherd, Psalms 22, and the Great Shepherd, Psalm 23. The Chief Shepherd, Psalm 24. Unity Psalm, Psalm 133. Psalm of Jerusalem, Psalm 48, 122, 126, 132, and 137. Family Psalm, Psalm 127 and 128. Security Psalm, Psalm 121. Psalm of the Only True God, Psalm 115. Psalm of the Exodus, Psalm 114. Psalm of Refuge, Psalm 46. The Ladder of Faith, Psalm 37. Psalm of Supreme Praise, Psalm 103, 148, and 150. Psalm of Old Age, Psalm 71. The Old 100 Psalm, Psalm 100. The Psalm of Death, Psalm 90. Psalm of Life, Psalm 91. The Deliverance Psalms, Psalm 31 and 116. The House of God Psalms, Psalm 84. The Wealth of God Psalm 50. The Word of God Psalm 19 and 119. The Voice of God Psalm 29. The Mercy of God Psalm 136. The Goodness of God Psalms 107 and 27. The Omniscience and Omnipresence of God Psalm 139. The Omnipotence of God Psalm 147. The Psalm of the Davidic Covenant, Psalm 89. The History of Israel Psalm, Psalm 78, 105, 106. The Psalms of the Why, Psalms 42 and Psalm 73. Psalms of the Deepest Despair, Psalms 69 and Psalms 88. The Book of Proverbs. Introduction. A proverb is a short sentence drawn from long experience. There are several authors of the Book of Proverbs. Number 1, Solomon, in chapter 1 through 24. We are told in 1 Kings 4 verse 32 that he wrote 3,000 proverbs and composed over 1,000 songs. However, chapters 1 through 24 contain only a fraction of this number. B, the men of Hezekiah, Proverbs 25 through 29. Agur, chapter 30. Lemuel, chapter 31. The book tells a story It is a picture of a young man starting out in life. The first lesson is given in chapter 1, verse 7. Two schools bid for him, and both sent out their literature. One is the school of wisdom, the other the school of fools. Number 4, the key word of Proverbs is, of course, wisdom. Wisdom will protect her students, Proverbs 2, verse 8. Wisdom will direct her students, Proverbs 3, verse 5 and 6. Wisdom will perfect her students, Proverbs 4, verse 18. There are several classic passages in this book, the warnings of wisdom, Proverbs 1, verse 20 through 31. The rewards of wisdom, Proverbs 3, verse 5 and 6. The energy of wisdom, Proverbs 6, verse 6 through 11. The godless whore, Proverbs 7, verse 1 through 27. The goodly wife, or the godly wife, Proverbs 31, verse 10 through 31. The sovereign Savior, Proverbs 8, verse 22 through 31. 15 famous facts, Proverbs 30, verse 18 through 31. The riotous rebel, Proverbs 30, verse 11 through 14. Proverbs in the Old Testament is the Old Testament equivalent of the Epistle of James. It is impossible to offer a chronological outline of this book. At least 11 main subjects are discussed. A good name. The memory of the just is blessed, but the name of the wicked shall rot. Proverbs 10, verse 7. A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and loving favor than silver and gold. Proverbs 22, verse 1. Youth and discipline. A man with a level-headed son is happy, but a rebel's mother is sad. Proverbs 10, verse 1, 17, verse 21, and verse 25, and Proverbs 19, verse 13. A wise son will listen to his father, but a young mocker won't. Proverbs 13, verse 1. He that spareth his rod hateth his son, but he that loveth him chasteneth him betimes. Proverbs 13, verse 24. Chasten thy son while there is hope, and let not thy soul spare for his crying. Proverbs 19, verse 18. Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6. Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction shall drive it far from him. Proverbs 22, verse 15, 29, verse 15, and verse 17. Withhold not correction from the child, for if thou beatest him with a rod, he shall not die. Thou shalt beat him with the rod, and shalt deliver his soul from hell. Proverbs 23, verse 13, and verse 14. See 23, verse 13, 15 through 25. And 30, verse 11 through 14. In business matters, God hates a dishonest scale and delights in honesty. Proverbs 11, verse 1, 16, verse 11, 20, verse 10, and verse 23. Don't sign a note for someone you barely know. Proverbs 6, verse 1 through 5, 11, verse 15, 17, verse 18. Don't withhold repayment of your debts. Proverbs 3, verse 27. God will not let a good man starve to death. Proverbs 10, verse 3. Lazy men are soon poor. Hard workers have an abundant supply. Proverbs 10, verse 4, 22, verse 29. A lazy fellow is a pain to his employer, like smoke in the eyes or vinegar that sets the teeth on edge. Proverbs 11, verse 26. He that trusts in his riches shall fall. Proverbs 11, verse 28. It is wrong to accept a bribe to twist justice. Proverbs 17, verse 23. Develop your business first before building your house. Proverbs 24, verse 27. Riches can disappear fast, and the king's crown doesn't stay in the family forever, so watch your business interests closely. Know the state of your flocks and your herds. Then there will be lambs wool enough for clothing, and goat's milk enough for food for all your household after the hay is harvested and the new crops appear, and the mountain grasses are gathered in. Chapter 27, verse 23 through 27, the Living Bible. Marriage. Drink waters out of your own cistern. Proverbs 5, verse 15. Rejoice with the wife of your youth. Proverbs 5:18. A beautiful woman lacketh discretion, and modesty is like a fine gold ring in a pig's snout. Proverbs 11, verse 22. He that troubleth his own house shall inherit the wind. Proverbs 11:29. A virtuous woman is a crown to her husband, but she that maketh ashamed is as rottenness to his bones. Proverbs 12:4. Every wise woman builds her house, but the foolish one plucks it down with her hands. Proverbs 14:1 and 19:13. Whosoever finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor of the Lord. Proverbs 18:22. It is better to dwell in a corner of a housetop than with a brawling woman in a wide house. Proverbs 21:9 and 25:24. It is better to dwell in the wilderness than with a contentious and angry woman. Proverbs 21:19. Who can find a virtuous woman? Note, the most detailed answer to this question is given in the last chapter of Proverbs 31. Immorality. It means to flout the law of God. Proverbs 2:17. It leads along the road to death and hell. 2:18, 7:27, and 9:18. It pollutes the conscience. 5:4. Causes one to groan in anguish and shame when disease consumes the body. 5:11. Leads to bitter remorse. 5:12 and 13. Will be judged by God. 5:21. Or bring a man to poverty. 6:26. They will burn the soul as surely as fire burns the skin. 6:27 and verse 32. It can be compared to 7:22 and 23. An ox going to the butcher, a trapped stag awaiting the death arrow, a bird flying into a snare. Evil companions. Refuse them, for in attempting to trap others, they only trap themselves. Proverbs 1, verse 10 through 19. Refuse them, for they eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. 4, verse 17. Refuse them, for their kindness is a trick. They want to use you as their pawn. 23, verse 6 through 8. Refuse them, for a man's true character is reflected by the friends he chooses. Proverbs 27, verse 19. Wisdom. The fear of God is its root. Proverbs 1, verse 7 and 9, verse 10. It will gain one many honors. So Proverbs 1, verse 9. It will keep one from immorality. 2:16. It will direct all one's paths. 3:6. It will give one renewal, health, and vitality. 3, verse 8. It will, as one wisely tithes, fill one's barns with wheat and barley, and overflow the wine vats with the finest wines. 3, verse 9 and 10. It is better than silver, gold, and precious rubies. 3:14, 8:11, and verse 19. It gives a poor life, riches, honor, pleasure, and peace. 3:16 and 17 and 9, verse 11. It was God's method in creation. 3:19 and 20. It is the principal thing. 4:7. It should be loved like a sweetheart. 7, verse 4. It brings the favor of God. 8, verse 35. Self-control. It is better to have a self-control than to capture a mighty city. 16:32. A controlled man often begins something he can't. An uncontrolled man often begins something he cannot finish. 25, verse 8. A man without self-control is defenseless as a city with broken down walls. 25, verse 28. Strong drink gives false courage and leads to brawls. 20, verse 1. Fills the heart with anguish and sorrow. 23, verse 29. Causes bloodshot eyes and many wounds. 23, verse 29. It bites like a poisoned serpent and stings like an adder. 23, verse 32. It leads to hallucinations and delirium tremens. 23, verse 33. It makes one say silly and stupid things. 23:33. It causes one to stagger like a sailor tossed at sea. 23, verse 34. It allows one to be beat up without even being aware of it. 23, verse 35. Causes leaders to forget their duties and thus pervert justice. 31, verse 5. Friendship. A true friend is always loyal and is born to help in time of need. 17, verse 17. Wounds from a friend are better than kisses from an enemy. 27, verse 6. Never abandon a friend, either yours or your father's. 27, verse 10. Friendly suggestions are as pleasant as perfume. 27, verse 9. A friendly discussion is as stimulating as the sparks that fly when iron strikes iron. 27 verse 17. A man who would have friends must himself be friendly. 18 verse 24. A true friend sticks closer than a brother. 18 verse 24. Words in the tongue of the just is as a choice silver. 10 verse 20. He that refrains from speaking is wise. 10, 19, and 11 verse 12. The lips of the righteous feed many. 10 verse 21. The hypocrite with his mouth destroys his neighbor. 11 verse 9. A talebearer reveals secrets, but one of a faithful spirit conceals the matter. 11 verse 13. Some speak like the piercings of a sword, but the tongue of the wise is health. 12 verse 18. He who keepeth his mouth keeps his life, but he that opens wide his lips shall have destruction. 13 verse 3. A true witness delivers souls. 14 verse 25. A soft answer turns away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. 15 verse 1. A wholesome tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness is a breach in the spirit. 15 verse 4. A word spoken in due season is good. 15 verse 23. The heart of the righteous studies to answer. 15 verse 28. Pleasant words are like a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and health to the bones. 16 verse 24. A forward man sows strife, and a whisperer separates chief friends. 16 verse 28, 17 verse 9. The beginning of strife is like letting out water. Therefore leave off contention before it be meddled with. 17 verse 14. Various groupings. 7 things that God hates. Chapter 6 verse 16 through 19. A proud look, lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a wicked, plotting heart, eagerness to do wrong, false witness, sowing discord among brothers. 4 things which are never satisfied. Proverbs 30 verse 15 and 16. The grave, the barren womb, barren desert, and fire. 4 wonderful and mysterious things in Proverbs 30 verse 18 and 19. How an eagle glides through the sky, how a serpent crawls upon a rock, how a ship finds its way across the ocean, the growth of love between a man and a woman, 4 things which the earth finds unbearable. 30 verse 21 through 23. A slave who becomes a king, a fool when he is filled with meat, a bitter woman when she finally marries, a servant girl who marries her mistress's husband. 4 small but wise things. 30 verse 24 through 28. Ants. They aren't strong, but store up food for the winter. Cliff badgers, delicate little animals who protect themselves by living among the rocks. The locusts, though they have no leader, they stay together in swarms. Spiders, they are easy to catch and kill, yet are found even in kings' palaces. 4 stately monarchs, 30 verse 29 through 31. The lion, king of animals, he won't turn aside for anyone. The greyhound, the he-goat, a king as he leads his army. 2 things Argur request of God, 30 verse 7 through 9, to remove from me vanity and lies. Give me neither poverty nor riches, feed me with food convenient for me, lest I be full and deny thee and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and take the name of my God in vain. In addition to all this, there are a number of classical passages in this book. Some of the more important are as follows. Because I have called and ye refused, I have stretched out my hand and no man regarded. But ye have set at naught all my counsel, and with none of my reproof I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your fear cometh. When your fear cometh as desolation, and your destruction cometh as a whirlwind, when distress and anguish cometh upon you, then shall they call upon me, but I will not answer, and they shall seek me early, but they shall not find me. Proverbs 1 verse 24 through 28. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not to thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Honor the Lord with the substance, and with the first fruits of all thine increase. So shall thy barns be filled with plenty, and thy presses shall burst out with new wine. My son, despise not the chastening of the Lord, nor neither be weary of his correction. For whom the Lord loveth, he correcteth, even as a father the son in whom he delighteth. The Lord by wisdom hath founded the earth, by understanding hath he established the heavens. By his knowledge the depths are broken up, and the clouds drop down the dew. My son, let not them depart from thine eyes. Keep sound wisdom and discretion, so shall they be life unto thy soul, and grace to thy neck. Then shalt thou walk in thy way safely, and thy foot shall not stumble. When thou liest down, thou shalt not be afraid. Yea, thou shalt lie down, and thy sleep shall be sweet. Be not afraid of sudden fear, neither of the desolation of the wicked when it cometh. For the Lord shall be thy confidence, and shall keep thy foot from being taken. Proverbs 3, verse 5 and 6, verse 9 through 12, and verse 19 through 26. These 6 things doth the Lord hate, yea, 7 are an abomination unto him: a proud look, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, and a heart that deviseth evil, wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among brethren. Proverbs 6, verse 16 through 19. The Lord possessed me in the beginning of his way, before his works of old. I was set up from everlasting, from the beginning wherever the earth was, when there was no depths. I was brought forth, when there was no fountain abounding with water. Before the mountains were settled, before the hills was I brought forth. While as yet he had not made the earth, nor the fields, nor the highest part of the world, of the dust of the world. When he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he set a compass upon the face of the depth, when he established the clouds above, when he strengthened the fountains of the deep, when he gave to the sea his decree that the waters should not pass his commandment, when he appointed the foundations of the earth, then I was by him as one brought up with him, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him, rejoicing in the habitable part of his earth, and my delights were with the sons of men. Proverbs 8:22 through 31. The fruit of the righteous is the tree of life, and he that winneth souls is wise. Proverbs 11, verse 30. There is a way that seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Proverbs 14, verse 12 and verse 34. Commit thy works unto the Lord, and thy thoughts shall be established. When a man's ways please the Lord, he maketh even his enemies to be at peace with him. Pride goeth before destruction, and an haughty spirit before a fall. Proverbs 16, verse 3, verse 7, and verse 18. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous runneth into it and are safe, and is saved. Proverbs 18, verse 10. For a just man falleth 7 times and riseth up again, but the wicked shall fall into mischief. Rejoice not when thine enemy falleth, and let not thine heart be glad when he stumbleth. Be not a witness against thy neighbor without a cause, and deceive not with thy lips. Say not, I will do so to him as he had done to me. I will render to the man according to his work. Proverbs 24, verse 16, 17, 28, and 29. Confidence in an unfaithful man in time of trouble is like a broken tooth and a foot out of joint. As he that taketh away a garment in cold weather, and as vinegar upon nitre, so is he that singeth songs to the heavy heart. If thine enemy be hungry, give him bread to eat, and if he be thirsty, give him water to drink. For thou shalt heap coals of fire upon his head, and the Lord shall reward thee. Proverbs 25, verse 19 through 22. Boast not thyself of tomorrow, for thou knowest not what a day may bring forth. Proverbs 27, verse 1. He that covereth his sin shall not prosper, but whoso confesseth and forsaketh them shall have mercy. Proverbs 28, verse 13. He that being often reproved hardeneth his neck shall suddenly be destroyed, and that without remedy. Where there is no vision, the people perish, but he that keepeth the law, happy is he. Proverbs 29, verse 1 and verse 18. Who hath ascended up into heaven, or descended? Who hath gathered the wind in his fist, or who hath bound the waters in a garment? Who hath established all the ends of the earth? What is his name, or what is his son's name, if thou canst tell? Every word of God is pure. He is a shield unto them that put their trust in him. Add thou not unto his words, lest he reprove thee, and thou be found a liar. 2 things have I required of thee. Deny me them not before I die. Remove far from me vanity and lies. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with food convenient for me, lest I be full and deny thee, or say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and take the name of my God in vain. There is a generation that curseth their father, and doth not bless their mother. There is a generation that are pure in their own eyes, and yet is not washed from their filthiness. There is a generation, how lofty are their eyes, and their eyelids are lifted up. There is a generation whose teeth are as swords, and their jaw teeth as knives, to devour the poor from the earth off the earth and the needy from among men. Proverbs 30, verse 4 through 9 and 11 through 14. Who can find a virtuous woman, for her price is far above rubies? The heart of her husband does safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. Her children arise up and call her blessed. Her husband also he praiseth her. Favor is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Proverbs 31, verse 10 through 12, and verse 28, verse 30. The book of Ecclesiastes, introduction. The meaning of the word is to address an assembly. The purpose of the book, to convince men of the uselessness of any worldview which does not rise above the horizon of man himself. It pronounces the verdict of vanity of vanities upon any philosophy of life which regards the created world of human enjoyment as an end in life. Gleason L. Archer, A Survey of the Old Testament, Introduction. Page 459. You do not have to go outside the Bible to find the merely human philosophy of life. God has given us in the book of Ecclesiastes the record of all that human thinking and natural religion has ever been able to discover concerning the meaning and goal of life. The arguments in the book, therefore, are not God's arguments, but God's record of man's argument. This explains why such passages in 1 verse 5, 2 verse 24, 3 verse 3, verse 4, verse 8, verse 11, verse 19, and verse 20, and 8 verse 15 are at positive variance with the rest of the Bible. What is the Bible all about? Henrietta Mears, page 200. Did Solomon teach there is no life after death? The answer is no. See chapter 3 verse 16, 11 verse 9, 12 verse 14. The key words in Ecclesiastes are man, used 47 times, labor 36 times, and under the sun 30, and vanity 37. The book of Ecclesiastes may be summarized by two statements, one made by a sewer worker in Chicago and the other by a well-known agnostic lawyer. Both statements were in response to a question concerning their personal philosophy of life. There is a statement in the Bible which summarizes my life. It says, we have toiled all night and have taken nothing. Luke 5, verse 5. Clarence Darrow. I digged the ditch to get to the money, to buy the food, to get the strength to dig the ditch. Cook County sewer employee. The quest, a man's problem stated. Chapter 1 through chapter 2. Even before he starts the search, Solomon has doubts. In his opinion, everything seems so futile. Ecclesiastes 1 verse 2. Generations come and go, but it seems to make no difference. 1 verse 4. The sun rises and sets, the wind twists back and forth, but neither seems to get any place or accomplish any purpose. Chapter 1 verse 5 and 6. The river runs into the sea, but the river is never full. The water returns again to the rivers and flows again to the sea. 1 verse 7. Everything appears so unutterably weary and tiresome. 1 verse 8. No man seems satisfied regardless of what he has seen or heard. 1 verse 8. History merely repeats itself. Absolutely nothing new ever occurs under the sun. 1 verse 9 and verse 10. 100 years from now, everything will have been forgotten regardless what occurs today. Chapter 1 verse 11. Was life truly this way everywhere? Could a wise and healthy man, by searching the length and breadth of the land, find peace and purpose? Solomon would try. This he diligently did by drinking deeply at the wells of the following human wisdom. I commune with my own heart, saying, Lo, I am come to great estate, and have gotten more wisdom than all they that have been before me in Jerusalem. Yea, my heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge, and I gave my heart to know wisdom, and to know it madness and folly. I perceive that this also is vexation of spirit. Chapter 1, verse 16 and 17. Solomon had more natural capacity to accumulate and apply raw facts than any man who ever lived except for Christ. But he sadly concluded, for in much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. 1 verse 18. Pleasure, chapter 2 verse 1 through 3. Philosophy has failed. says the preacher, so let merriment be tried. Music, dance, wine, not to excess. The funny story, the clever repartee, these are now cultivated. Clowns are now welcome to the court where only grave philosophy had been. The halls of the palace resounded with laughter and gaiety. Henrietta C. Mears, What is the Bible All About? Page 201. But laughter and liquor could in no way soothe man's soul. Note the sad conclusion. Outstead of laughter, it is mad. And of mirth, what doeth it? Chapter 2, verse 2 and 8, verse 15. Alcohol, 2, verse 2, verse 3. I sought in my heart to give myself unto wine. Great building projects, chapter 2, verse 4. I made me great works. I builded houses. Solomon now attempts to plug that hole to his soul by inaugurating a great public works program. Aqueducts, pools, palaces, and gleaming buildings soon grace the Syrian skyline. The court comedians give way to the great architects, but all too soon the building campaign wears thin and is quietly dropped. Beautiful gardens and parks, chapter 2, verse 4 through 6. I planted vineyards. I made me gardens and orchards, and I planted trees in them of all kinds of fruits. I made pools of water to water therewith the wood that bringeth forth trees. Chapter 2, verse 4 through 6. Now luscious vineyards, graceful gardens, exotic and rare flowers, tropical plants, and other gems of green suddenly sprout up. Jerusalem and the vicinity bloom like the original Garden of Eden, but alas, before long, the frost of disinterest puts the blight to the bloom also. Personal indulgences, chapter 2, verse 7. I got me servants and maidens and had servants born in my house. 2, verse 7. The king now had an individual servant for every wish, but none could serve up his wish for inward peace and purpose, sex, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. 1 Kings 11, verse 3. Massive wealth. I had great possessions of herds and flocks, above all that were in Jerusalem before me. I gathered also silver and gold and peculiar treasure of the king and the provinces. Proverbs 2, verse 7 and 8. International reputation. And she, the queen of Sheba, said to the king, It was a true report that I heard in my own land of thy acts and of thy wisdom. Howbeit, I believed not the words until I came and my eyes had seen it. And behold, the half was not told me. Thy wisdom and thy prosperity exceedeth the fame which I heard. 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 6 and 7. Cattle breeding, chapter 2, verse 7 of Ecclesiastes. Great herds of cows, sheep, oxen, goats, and other animals would now graze upon the green Palestinian pastures. But while the skin and meat of these animals might clothe and feed the outer man, the inner person remained naked and starving. Music, chapter 2, verse 8. I got me men singers and women singers, and the delights of the sons of men as musical instruments and all of that sort. But the missing chord of contentment was not to be found through music, however beautiful the song and talents of the singers. Literature. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his song were 1,005. 1 Kings 4, verse 32. Natural science. And he spake of trees, from the cedar that tree that is in Lebanon, even unto the hyssop that springeth out of the wall. He spake also of beast and of fowl, and of creeping things, and of fishes. 1 Kings 4, verse 33. Military power. And Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots, and 12,000 horsemen. 1 Kings 4, verse 26. And King Solomon made a navy of ships and on the shore of the Red Sea. 1 Kings 9, verse 26. The Digest, Man's Problem Studied, chapter 3 through chapter 10. After completing an exhaustive and doubtless exhausting journey, Solomon returns home, chapter 4, verse 1, and contemplates his travels. He conducts the following about life apart from God. It is utterly futile, 2 verse 11. Filled with repetition, 3 verse 1 through 8. Permeated with sorrow, 4 verse 1. Grievous and frustrating, 2 verse 17. Uncertain, 9 verse 11 and 12. Without purpose, 4 verse 2, verse 3, and 8, chapter 8, verse 15. Incurable, chapter 1, verse 15. Unjust, chapter 7, verse 15, 8, verse 14, 9, verse 11, 10, verse 6 and 7. It is on the level of animals' existence, chapter 3, verse 19. The best man's problem solved, chapter 11 through chapter 12. Solomon concludes that Even with God, life is a mystery. But apart from Him, it becomes a horrifying nightmare. Therefore, it is best if man finds God early in his life. Proverbs 11, verse 9 and 10, and chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. Fears God throughout his life. Ecclesiastes 12, verse 13 and 14. That was Ecclesiastes 11, verse 9, 10, and chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. Vernon McGee aptly summarizes verses 1 through 7 in the following way. Verse 2, failing eyesight makes it appear that the sun, moon, and the stars are getting dimmer. Time flies and one sad experience follows another. Clouds return after rain. Verse 3, the keepers of the house shall tremble, refers to the legs. The old person begins to totter. Strong men's are the shoulders that are no longer erect. Grinders are the teeth. Those that look out the windows refers to failing eyesight. Verse 4, doors shut in the secret refer to being hard of hearing. Sound of grinding is low, refers to the tongue. The voice of the old age gets thin. Shall rise up at the door of a bird, yet tuck an alarm clock to wake him before now the chirping of a bird disturbs his sleep. Daughters of music shall be brought low, indicates that he can no longer sing in the choir, cannot carry a tune anymore. Verse 5, afraid of that which is high, things that formerly did not frighten him. Fear shall be in the way. He no longer enjoys traveling. Almond tree shall flourish. Our senior citizen is getting gray-headed if his hair has not fallen out. Grasshopper shall be a burden. Little things annoy him. Desire shall fail. Romance is gone. Man goeth to his long home. Death comes. Verse 6, silver cord, the spinal cord, the golden bowl, the head, the pitcher, the lungs, the wheel, the heart. The Song of Solomon. Background of the story. 1. Act 1, the Shunammite Cinderella. Solomon had a vineyard in the hill country of Ephraim, just outside the little town of Shunem, about 50 miles north of Jerusalem. Chapter 8, verse 11. The vineyard was rented out to a family of sharecroppers consisting of a mother, 2 sons, and 2 daughters. The oldest of these girls was a Shulamite, and the youngest of her little sister. It's chapter 6, 13, and chapter 8, verse 8. The Shulamite was the Cinderella of the family, having great natural beauty but unnoticed by the world. Her brothers made her work very hard tending the vineyard, so that she had little opportunity to care for her personal appearance. Chapter 1, verse 6. She pruned the vines. She set traps for the little foxes. 2, verse 15, the Song of Solomon. She also kept the flocks. Chapter 1, verse 8. From being out in the open so often, she became sunburned. 1, verse 6. Acts 2. The shepherd stranger. One day, a mysterious, handsome stranger comes to the vineyard and soon wins the heart of the Shulamite girl. Unknown to her, he is really Solomon disguised as a lowly shepherd. She asked about his flocks. 1, verse 7. She answers evasively, but he answers evasively, but is very definite concerning his love for her. Chapter 1, verse 8 through 10. He leaves her but promises he will someday return to her. During his absence, she dreams of him on 2 occasions. The first dream that they are already married, and that one night she awakens to find him missing from her bed. She quickly dresses herself and goes out looking for him. Chapter 3, verse 2 through 4. The second dream that her beloved has returned and besought her to open the door and let him in. But she refuses, for she is unwilling to reclothe herself and soil her feet going to the door. Soon, however, her heart smites her for this shabby action, and she leaps for the door, but alas, he has gone. We read, my beloved put his hand by the hole of the door. I rose up to open to my beloved, and my hands dropped with myrrh, my fingers with sweet-smelling myrrh upon the handles of the lock. Chapter 5, verse 4 and 5. Dr. J. Vernon McGee informs us that a lovely custom of that day was for the lover to place sweet-smelling myrrh inside the handle of the bride's door. The bride then began her frantic search for the lover she had so carelessly ignored. During her search, the guards of the city mistreated her, and the watchman on the wall tore off her veil. She then pleaded with the women of Jerusalem to aid her in finding her lover and informing him of her love for him. Chapter 5, verse 6 to 8. Suddenly and joyfully, she discovers his whereabouts. My beloved is gone down into the garden, to the beds of spices, to feed in the gardens and to gather lilies. I am my beloved's, and my beloved's is mine. He feedeth among the lilies. Chapter 6, verse 2 and 3. These then are her two dreams concerning the mysterious shepherd lover of the Shulamite girl. But why did he leave her? Where did he go? Would he ever return? Act 3. The mighty monarch. One day, the little town of Shulam receives some electrifying news. King Solomon himself is approaching their city, but the lovesick and lonely maiden is not interested and takes no further notice until word is brought to her that the powerful potentate himself desires to see her. She is puzzled until she is brought into his presence, where she recognizes him as her beloved shepherd. He then gently explains to her that although he has already gathered 60 wives, 80 concubines, and unnumbered virgins, that she will be his choice bride in true love. Chapter 6, verse 8. He invites her to come with him and promises to care for her little sister. Chapter 8, verse 8 and 9. The bride is then placed in the king's chariot made from the wood of Lebanon, with silver post, golden canopy, and a purple seating. Chapter 3, verse 9 and 10. Together they ride off to the royal palace in Jerusalem, accompanied by 60 mighty swordsmen and experienced bodyguards. Chapter 3, verse 7 and 8. The bride of the story as described by the bridegroom. She was the most beautiful girl in the world. Chapter 1, verse 8. She was like a bouquet of flowers in a garden. Chapter 1, verse 14. Her eyes were as soft as doves. Chapter 1, verse 15. She was as a lily among the thorns as compared to his other wives. Chapter 2, verse 2. Her hair fell across her face like flocks of goats which frisk across the slopes of Gilead. 4, verse 1. Her teeth were as white as sheep's wool. 4, verse 2. Her lips were like a thread of scarlet. 4, verse 3. And made of honey. 4, verse 11. Her neck was as stately as the Tower of David. 4, verse 4. Her bosom was as twin fawns of a gazelle feeding among the lilies. 4, verse 5. She was like a lovely orchard bearing precious fruit. 4, verse 13. She was as a garden fountain, a well of living water, refreshing as the streams of the Lebanon mountains. 4, verse 15. Her thighs were like jewels, the work of the most skilled of craftsmen. 7, verse 1. Her navel was as lovely as the goblet filled with wine. 7, verse 2. Her waist like the heap of wheat set about with lilies. 7, verse 2. Her nose was shapely like the Tower of Lebanon overlooking Damascus. 7, verse 4. He was completely overcome by a single glance of her beautiful eyes. 4, verse 9. The bridegroom of the story as described by the bride. He was as swift as a young gazelle leaping and bounding over the hills. 2, verse 9. He was ruddy and handsome, the fairest among 10,000. 5, verse 10. His head was as purest gold, covered by wavy raven hair. 5, verse 11. His eyes were as doves beside the water brooks, deep and quiet. 5, verse 12. His cheeks were like sweetly scented beds of spice. 5, verse 13. His lips were as perfumed lilies, and his breath like myrrh. 5, verse 13. His arms were as round bars of gold set with topaz. 5, verse 14. His body was bright ivory encrusted with jewels. 5, verse 14. His legs were pillars of marble set in sockets of finest gold, like cedars of Lebanon. 5, verse 15. Now we're going to study the chaotic kingdom age. Chaotic kingdom age. 1 Kings chapter 12 verse 22 through, and also 2 Kings chapter 1 through chapter 17. 2 Chronicles chapter 10 through 36. Obadiah, Joel, Jonah, Amos, Hosea, Micah, Isaiah, Nahum, Zephaniah, Habakkuk, Jeremiah, and Lamentations. Lamentations. The stage covers a period of around 325 years from 930 BC to 605 BC. The key events take place in Jerusalem and Samaria. The period begins with a tragic civil war which splits the nation Israel into two opposing kingdoms. The period ends with the capture of both these kingdoms by two enemy Gentile nations, 1 Kings chapter 12, 2 Kings chapter 17, and chapter 25. The chaotic stage would feature the following. One king, Josiah, discovered God's word in the temple, and another king, Jehoiakim, attempting to destroy it in the fire. 2 Kings chapter 22 and Jeremiah chapter 36. The writing of at least 12 Old Testament books by 11 human authors, and these are Obadiah, Joel, Jonah, Amos, Hosea, Micah, Isaiah, Nahum, Zephaniah, Habakkuk, and Jeremiah, who also wrote Lamentations. The second of four great miracle-working periods in the Bible. Number one, the first was during the time of Moses and Joshua. Number two, the second was during the time of Elijah and Elisha. The third was during the time of Daniel and Ezekiel, and the fourth was during the time of Christ and the apostles. All three of the individuals who were raised from the dead in the Old Testament. 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 17 through 24, 2 Kings chapter 4, and 2 Kings chapter 13, verse 20 and 21. The only Old Testament man who ever was healed of leprosy, Naaman, 2 Kings chapter 5. The salvation of Samaria, the northern capital, by 4 lepers, and the salvation of Jerusalem, southern capital, by the death angel, 2 Kings chapter 7 and chapter 19. The beginning of the Samaritan race, 2 Kings chapter 17. The second and third of 3 occasions when God rolled back the waters of the Jordan River, 2 Kings chapter 2, for the first see Joshua chapter 3. The account of a singing choir defeating an enemy on the battlefield. And they rose early in the morning and went forth into the wilderness of Tekoa. And as they went forth, Jehoshaphat stood and said, Hear me, O Judah, and ye inhabitants of Jerusalem. Believe in the Lord your God, and so shall ye be established. Believe his prophets, and so shall ye prosper. And when he had consulted with the people, he appointed singers unto the Lord, and that should praise the beauty of holiness as they went out before the army, and to say, Praise the Lord, for his mercy endureth forever. And when they began to sing and to praise, the Lord set ambushments against the children of Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir, which were come against Judah, and they were smitten. 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 20 through 22. The sight of water being burned by fire, 1 Kings 18. Then the fire of the Lord fell up and consumed the burnt sacrifice, and the wood, and the stones, and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. 1 Kings 18, verse 38. The sight of an axe head floating on water. 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 1 through 7. The second of 2 men who went to heaven without first dying. 2 Kings chapter 2. And it came to pass, as they still went on and talked, that behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and parted them both asunder, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 11. In the only time in the Old Testament where men are allowed to see God's mounted army of angels, 2 Kings chapter 6. And when the servant of the man of God was risen early and gone forth, behold, an host compassed the city both with horses and chariots. And his servant said unto him, Alas, my master, how shall we do? And he answered, Fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and of chariots of fire round about Elisha. 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 15 through 17. The chaotic kingdom stage. This stage is the most interwoven, fast-moving, and detailed period in all of the Bible. It will be considered under 3 main divisions: an introduction to the chaotic kingdom stage, which we just read, and the rulers of the chaotic kingdom stage. At this point, we will employ a 2-fold method: the floodlight shotgun approach, Here the reign of every king will be briefly outlined, then the spotlight, the rifle approach. Here the reign of the more important kings will be expanded upon. The Old Testament books written during the chaotic kingdom stage. An introduction to the chaotic kingdom stage. After the death of Solomon, the tragic civil war split Israel into two opposing kingdoms, the north and the south. The northern kingdom. It began in 931 BC and lasted for 210 years. The first ruler was Jeroboam and the last ruler was Hoshea. The total number of kings was 19. Not one was righteous. It consisted of 10 tribes. Its capital later became Samaria. It was captured by the Syrians in 721 BC. There was no return from captivity. The southern kingdom. It began in 931 BC and lasted 326 years. The first ruler was Jeroboam. The last ruler was Zedekiah. The total number of rulers was 29. 20. Total number of rulers were 20, 19 kings and 1 queen. 8 of the 20 were righteous. It consisted of 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin. Its capital remained Jerusalem. It was captured by the Babylonians in 606 BC. There were 3 separate returns from captivity. Note, the chaotic kingdom stage may be thus divided into 2 time periods. The divided kingdom, both north and south, from 931 to 721 BC. The single kingdom, only the south, 721 to 605 BC. The rulers of the chaotic kingdom stage, the floodlight shotgun approach. The northern rulers, Jeroboam, 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 26 through chapter 14 verse 20, and 2 Chronicles chapter 9 verse 29 through chapter 13 verse 22. He served as a cabinet member under Solomon, but fled to Egypt for a while to escape the king's wrath. 1 Kings 11 verse 28 and verse 40. He led the revolt of the 10 tribes at Shechem. His false religion caused Israel to sin. His false altar was destroyed. His arm was paralyzed, and his son stricken by God as punishment for his sin. He was defeated in the battle of Abijam, the second king of the south. He was stricken with a plague from God and died. He ruled for 22 years, 931 to 909 BC. Nadab, 1 Kings chapter 15, verse 25 through 28. He was the son of Jeroboam. He was assassinated by a rebel named Baasha. Nadab was thus the first of 6 northern kings to be murdered while in office. He ruled for 2 years, 910 to 908 BC. Baasha, 1 Kings 15:27 through 16 verse 7 and 2 Chronicles 16 verse 1 through 6. He unknowingly fulfilled the prophecy given to Jeroboam's wife by Ahijah the prophet in killing Nadab and his relatives. Compare 1 Kings 14 verse 14 with 15 verse 29. He declared war on Asa, the 3rd king of Judah, and began building a wall fortress at Ramah to control the road to Judah, thus hoping to cut off all trade to Jerusalem. 2 Chronicles 16 verse 1. He was rejected by God because of his sin. Jehu the prophet predicted that Baasha's descendants would suffer the same punishment God placed upon Jeroboam. Baasha ruled for 24 years, 909 to 885 BC. Note it can be seen already that some of the reigns overlapped each other. That is, on occasion, both father and son may have ruled at the same time. This explains the difference in the total number of years of all the northern kings as given in the Bible, which is 252 years, and the actual time involved 208 years, beginning with Jeroboam in 931 BC. Elah, 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 6 through 14. He was the son of Baasha. He was assassinated by the commander of his royal chariot troops, a man named Zimri. He was drunk at the time. He ruled for 2 years, 885 to 883 BC. Zimri, 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 9 through 20. He fulfilled Jehu's prophecy by slaughtering all the seed of Baasha. Compare 1 Kings 16, verse 7 with 16, verse 12. Zimri was then trapped by Omri, Israel's new commander-in-chief, in the palace, which resulted in a fiery suicidal death. He reigned but 7 days, 885 BC. Omri, 1 Kings 16, verse 15 through 28. He moved the northern capital from Tirzah to Samaria. He arranged the political marriage of his son Ahab to Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians. He ruled for 12 years, 885 to 873 BC. Ahab, 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 28 through chapter 22, verse 40, and 1 Chronicles chapter 18, verse 1 through 34. He married Jezebel. He was allowed to defeat the Syrians on 2 occasions. He was denounced by Elijah for encouraging Baal worship, for his part in the murder of Naboth, for the sparing of the life of a godless Syrian king, for he tricked godly King Jehoshaphat, the 4th king of Judah, into twofold compromise, a matrimonial alliance whereby his wicked daughter Athaliah is given to Joram, the son of Jehoshaphat, a military alliance whereby Jehoshaphat and Ahab go to war against Assyria. The death of his wicked wife was predicted by Elijah. His own death was predicted by both Elijah and the prophet Micaiah. He was slain in battle with the Syrians. He ruled for 22 years, 874 to 852 BC. Ahaziah, 1 Kings 22 verse 40 through 2 Kings 1 verse 18 and 2 Chronicles 20 verse 35 through 37. He was the oldest son of Ahab and Jezebel. He persuaded Jehoshaphat to enter into a shipbuilding enterprise with him at Ezon-Geber, 2 Chronicles 20 verse 35 through 37. He suffered a severe and later fatal fall in his palace at Samaria. He turned to the pagan god Baal-zebub for healing, but received instead a condemnation of Elijah, whom he unsuccessfully attempted to arrest. He ruled for 2 years, 853 to 851 BC. Jehoram, 2 Kings chapter 3 verse 1 to chapter 9 verse 25 and 2 Chronicles 22 verse 5 through 7. He was the youngest son of Ahab and the brother of Ahaziah. He also, like father and brother, persuaded Jehoshaphat to enter into an alliance, this time a military campaign against the Moabites. The prophet Elijah at this time worked a miracle on the battlefield for Jehoshaphat's sake, which resulted in an allied victory over the Moabites. Elisha later helped Jehoram by warning him of several planned Syrian ambushes. Elisha then refuses to allow him to slaughter some enemy Syrian soldiers who had been supernaturally blinded by God. Jehoram was on the throne when God used the 4 lepers to save the city of Samaria from starvation. He was also the king with whom the Syrian leper named Naaman met. He was later murdered by Jehu in the valley of Jezreel. He ruled for 12 years, 852 to 840 BC. Jehu, 2 Kings 9 verse 1 through chapter 10 verse 36 and 2 Chronicles chapter 22 verse 7 through 12. He was anointed by Elisha in order to execute the dynasty of Ahab, which included Jehoram and Jezebel. He rode his chariot to the valley of Jezreel, where he executed both Jehoram and Ahaziah, the 6th king of Judah, not to be confused with the Ahaziah who was Jehoram's older brother. He then made his way to the city of Jezreel and killed Jezebel. After this, he demanded and received the head of the 70 sons of Ahab who were living in the city of Samaria. He continued his blood purge by slaying even the descendants and friends of Ahab. He finally, by trickery, assembled all the priests of Baal in a large convention hall in Jezreel, where he ordered the slaughter of each priest. He ruled for 28 years, 841 to 813 BC. Jehoahaz, 2 Kings 13 verse 1 through 9. He was the son of Jehu. He was oppressed by the Syrian king Hazael during his entire reign, and his army was finally reduced to 50,000 troops, 10 chariots, and 10,000 infantrymen. He briefly displayed remorse as Ahab once done in 1 Kings 21 verse 27 through 30, but apparently it was not true repentance. He ruled for 17 years, 814 to 797 BC. Jehoash, 2 Kings chapter 13 verse 10 through 14 verse 16, and 2 Chronicles 25 verse 17 through 24. He was the son of Jehoahaz He visited Elisha on his deathbed. He defeated Amaziah, the sixth king of Judah, on the battlefield. He related the second of two Old Testament fables to ridicule the arrogant claims of Amaziah. He led Amaziah back to Jerusalem as a captive and left the city, taking both wealth and hostages. He ruled for 16 years, 798 to 782 BC. Jeroboam the 2 Kings 14, verse 23 through 29. He was the son of Jehoash. He ruled longer than any other northern ruler. He was also one of the most powerful kings of the north. He recovered the lost territories of Israel surrounding the Dead Sea. God thus allowed him to prosper and enlarge his kingdom in spite of his wicked ways because of divine mercy upon the pitiful condition of Israel at that time. 2 Kings 14, verse 25 through 26. Jonah the prophet lived and ministered during this time. Jeroboam II ruled for 41 years, 793 to 753 BC. Zechariah, 2 Kings 14, verse 19 through 2 Kings 15, verse 12. He was the son of Jeroboam II. He was murdered by a rebel named Shalem. Zechariah was a great-great-grandson of Jehu and the fourth ruler in his dynasty. With his death, the line would cease, thus fulfilling God's prophecy to Jehu, 2 Kings 10, verse 30, 14, verse 29, 15, verse 8 through 12. He ruled for 6 months, 753 BC. Shalem, 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 10 through 15. He was murdered by a cruel warrior named Menahem. He ruled for 1 month, 752 BC. Menahem, 2 Kings 15, verse 14 through 22, he was one of the most brutal dictators to sit upon the northern throne. He rewarded any opposition on the part of his subjects by a wholesale slaughter, including the ripping open of pregnant women. He bought off the Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser, who had invaded Israel at that time, with a $2 million bribe. He ruled for 10 years, 752 to 742 BC. Pekahiah, 2 Kings 15, verse 22 through 26. He was the son of Menahem. He was assassinated by his army commander Pekah. He ruled for 2 years, 742 to 741 BC. Pekah, 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 27 through 31, and 2 Chronicles 28, verse 5 through 8. He joined Syria in an unsuccessful attack against the Judean king Ahab to punish the southern kingdom for refusing to team up with them in an effort to stop the growing Assyrian threat. During his reign, Tiglath-Pileser, the Assyrian king, invaded Israel and captured some of its northern and eastern cities. Pekah was assassinated by Hoshea. He ruled for 20 years, 740 to 732 BC. Note, it will be noted that only 8 years are in view, 740 to 732. It is thought that the first 12 years, 752 to 740, were shared by a co-regency arrangement with both Menahem and Pekahiah. Hoshea, 2 Kings 15:20 through 17, verse 6. He was the last ruler of the northern kingdom. After becoming a vassal to the Assyrian king Shalmaneser, Hoshea joined with Egypt in rebelling against Assyria. For this he was imprisoned, and the people were exiled to Assyria. 2 Kings 17, verse 4 through 6. Hoshea thus became the last of 10 northern kings. 8 died natural deaths, 7 were murdered, 1 died of suicide, 1 in battle, 1 under the judgment of God, and 1 in a fall. Not a single ruler turned to God. From this captivity, the 10 tribes have never been restored to Palestine. In fact, they would soon lose their very tribal identity, but not their ancestry. The future restoration of all 12 tribes of Israel will be consummated at the second coming of Christ. See Matthew 24, verse 27 through 31. The righteous God had to cut off Israel for their sin. 2 Kings 17, verse 7 and 8. The king of Assyria then planted colonies of people from various foreign countries into the depopulated land of the northern Israel. 2 Kings 17, verse 24. Soon after their arrival, a plague of man-eating lions sent by God terrified the land. In desperation, the colonists sent a message to the Assyrian ruler asking for a ministry of a Jehovah prophet that the plague be stopped. 17, verse 25 and 26. This lion plague had been predicted by Moses centuries back. Exodus 23 verse 29, Leviticus 26 verse 21 and 22. A prophet arrived and began his ministry from Bethel. The lion plague disappeared and a form of Jehovah worship appeared, but only in form, as the people continued with their idol worship as well. 2 Kings 17 verse 27 through 34. This is the beginning of the Samaritan race in the religion which was prevalent in the time of Jesus. See John chapter 4. Hoshea ruled for 9 years, 732 to 723 BC. Now the southern rulers, Rehoboam, 1 Kings 11:42 through 14 verse 31, and 2 Chronicles 9:31 through 12 verse 16. He was the son of Solomon. His stupidity caused the civil war of Israel. He had 18 wives and 60 concubines. They gave him 28 sons and 60 daughters. His favorite wife was Maacah, the evil daughter of Absalom. He was invaded by Shishak, the king of Egypt. He ruled 17 years, 931 to 914 BC. Abijam, 1 Kings 14 verse 31 through 15 verse 8, and 2 Chronicles 13 verse 1 through 22. He defeated by supernatural intervention the northern king Jeroboam on the battlefield. In spite of God's help at this time, he later degenerated into a wicked king. He ruled 3 years, 914 through 911 BC. Asa, 1 Kings 15 verse 8 through 14, and 2 Chronicles 14 verse 1 through 16 verse 14. He was Judah's first glorious king. He led Judah in a revival and was a great builder. God answered his prayer and delivered him from the massive Ethiopian attack. He even deposed his own grandmother Maacah because of her idolatry. He later was rebuked by a prophet for his sin and responded by throwing him in prison. He died with a foot disease, which problem he refused to take to God. He ruled 41 years, 911 to 870 BC. Jehoshaphat, 1 Kings 22 verse 41 through 50, 2 Chronicles 17 verse 1 through 20 verse 37. He was the second righteous king of Judah. He instituted a nationwide Bible education program. He compromised with Ahab and his 2 sons Ahaziah and Jehoram. He ruled for 25 years, 873 to 848 BC. Jehoram, 2 Kings 8 verse 26 through 29, 2 Chronicles 21 verse 1 through 20. He married Athaliah, the daughter of Jezebel and Ahab. He began his reign by murdering his 6 brothers. He received a posthumous message from Elijah predicting judgment upon him because of his wicked and murderous reign. He was attacked and defeated by the Philistines and Arabians. He died of a horrible disease and was unmourned at his funeral. He ruled for 8 years, 853 to 845 BC. Ahaziah, 2 Kings 8 verse 24 through 9, chapter 9 verse 29, and 2 Chronicles 22 verse 1 through 9. He was killed by Jehu, the 10th northern king. He ruled for only 1 year, 841 BC. Athaliah, 2 Kings 11 verse 1 through 20, and 2 Chronicles 22 verse 1 through 23 verse 21. She was the mother of the slain Ahaziah. At his death, she slaughtered all his children except one who was hidden from her. She herself was later executed. She ruled for 6 years, 841 to 835 BC. Joash, 2 Kings 11 verse 1 through chapter 12 verse 21, and 2 Chronicles 22 verse 10 through 24 verse 27. He was the surviving heir of Athaliah's bloodbath. For a while he lived for God, but later became a cruel leader. He sanctioned the stoning of Zechariah, the godly Jewish high priest, who had rebuked Judah's sin and called for national repentance. He was executed by his own palace guard. He ruled for 40 years, 835 to 795 BC. Amaziah, 2 Kings 14 verse 1 through 20, and 2 Chronicles 25 verse 1 through 28. He was a good king for a while and executed the men who had assassinated his father Joash. But he did not kill their children, obeying the Mosaic law, which said the sons were not to be killed for the sins of their fathers. Deuteronomy 24, verse 16, Ezekiel 18, verse 4 and verse 20. See 2 Chronicles 25, verse 1 through 4, and 2 Kings 12, 21, and chapter 14, verse 1 through 6 of 2 Kings. Amaziah then organized the army of Judah and found he had an army of 300,000. He then hired 100,000 experienced mercenary soldiers from Israel for $200,000 to help him fight against Edom. 2 Chronicles 25, verse 5 and 6. He was warned against this by a prophet. The king reluctantly sent these mercenaries home, bitterly resenting the lost money he had paid them, but the prophet reassured him, "The Lord is able to give thee much more than this." 2 Chronicles 25, verse 9. Here is a precious spiritual gem that should be carefully considered whenever God requires us to give up our time, talent, treasure, anything that close and precious to us. See Jesus' stirring words to Peter in Matthew 19, verse 27 through 29. The Israelite troops returned home, also angry and frustrated. On the way, they raided several cities of Judah and killed 3,000 people. 2 Chronicles 25, verse 13. Amaziah went into battle with only his own troops and soundly defeated Edom, killing 20,000 enemy soldiers. 26, verse 11. The foolish king brought back with him some Edomite idols and began worshiping them. God warned the king through a prophet of his divine anger. Amaziah refused to listen and curtly dismissed him, but not before the king's doom was predicted. Chapter 25, verse 14 through 16. The overconfident Amaziah then declared war on the northern king Jehoash for the disgraceful action of the returning Israelite mercenaries. 25, verse 17. This is all in 2 Chronicles. Northern King Joash responded to Amaziah's challenge by relating the second and final Old Testament fable. For the first one, see Judges 9, verse 8 through 15. Note the language of this fable. The thistle that was in Lebanon sent to the cedar that was in Lebanon, saying, "Give thy daughter to my son to wife." And there passed by a wild beast that was in Lebanon and trode down the thistle. 2 Chronicles 25, verse 18. Jehoash was at this point warning Amaziah not to let his Edomite victory blind him to reality, but to withdraw his arrogant declaration of war. But the plea fell on deaf ears. Amaziah was soundly defeated by Jehoash at Beth-shemesh and was led as a common prisoner back to his own capital in Jerusalem. Upon arriving, Jehoash dismantled 200 yards of city walls to effect an impressive victory celebration. He then carried off all the treasures of the temple and palace. Finally, the northern king left, taking with him many hostages. 2 Chronicles 25, verse 21 through 24. He ruled for 29 years, 796 to 767 BC. Uzziah, 2 Kings 15, verse 1 through 7, and 2 Chronicles 26, verse 1 through 23. He was a mighty warrior and builder. He attempted to intrude into the office of the priest. He was punished for his sin by leprosy. He ruled for 52 years, 792 to 740 BC. Jotham, 2 Kings 15, verse 32 through 38, 2 Chronicles 27, verse 1 through 9. He was a good king. 2 Chronicles 27, verse 6. He built the upper gate of the temple and erected fortresses and towers. He defeated the Ammonites and received a huge annual tribute of silver and wheat from them. He ruled for 16 years, 750 to 730 BC, 732 BC. Ahab, 2 Kings 16, verse 1 through 20, 2 Chronicles 28, verse 1 through 27. He was perhaps the second worst king of Judah. He sacrificed his own children to devilish gods. He was the first person to hear about the virgin birth. He ruled for 16 years, 732 to 716 BC. Hezekiah, 2 Kings 18, verse 1 through chapter 20, verse 21, and 2 Chronicles 29, verse 1 through chapter 33, verse 32, verse 33. He was the second best king of Judah. He was also the richest of all. He organized the greatest Passover celebration since the days of Solomon. He saw the death angel defeat the Assyrian enemies which had surrounded Jerusalem. He was supernaturally healed and given an additional 15 years to live. He ruled for 29 years, 716 to 687 BC. Manasseh, 2 Kings 21 verse 1 through 18 and 2 Chronicles 33 verse 1 through 20. He ruled longer than any northern or southern king. He was the worst of all the kings. He experienced a new birth prior to his death. He ruled for 55 years, 697 to 642 BC. Ammon, 2 Kings 21 verse 19 through 26 and 2 Chronicles 33 verse 21 through 25. He was like his father Manasseh, a wicked sinner. He was, unlike his father Manasseh, unrepentant. He was executed by his own household servants, and he ruled for 2 years, 643 to 641 BC. Josiah, 2 Kings 21 verse 1 through 2 Kings 23 verse 30, 2 Chronicles 34 verse 1 through 35 verse 27. He was the best king since David. The book of Moses was discovered in the temple during his reign. He led his people in a great revival. He was the last good king of Judah. He was killed in the battle with the Egyptians. He ruled for 31 years, 641 to 610 BC. Jehoahaz, 2 Kings chapter 23 verse 31 through 33 and 2 Chronicles 36 verse 1 through 4. This middle son of Josiah had both a sinful 2 Kings 23 verse 32 and a short-lived 2 Kings 23 verse 30 and 31 reign. He was disposed by Pharaoh Necho, who had previously killed his father Josiah in battle. After but 90 days on the throne in 2 Kings 23 verse 33, Necho then leveled a tax against Judah totaling $230,000. Jehoahaz was eventually carried into Egypt, where he died in captivity, 2 Kings 23 verse 34. Jehoahaz's younger brother Eliakim, renamed Jehoiakim by Necho, was chosen by the Egyptian king to succeed him on the throne of Judah, 2 Kings 23 verse 34. Things were now at rock bottom when the devil's man could pick the king over the Lord's people. He ruled for 3 months, 609 BC. Jehoiakim, 2 Kings 23 verse 34 through 24 verse 5 and 2 Chronicles 36 verse 5 through 7. He was the brother of Jehoahaz. He was probably Judah's third worst king. He persecuted Jeremiah the prophet. He experienced the first of Nebuchadnezzar's fearsome visits to Jerusalem. During this time, Daniel and other Hebrew young people, were taken to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. He died, and as Jeremiah had predicted, received the burial of an ass. He ruled for 11 years, 609 to 598 BC. Jehoiachin, 2 Kings 24 verse 6 through 16 and 2 Chronicles 36 verse 8 through 10. He was the son of Jehoiakim and grandson of Josiah. Jehoiachin was also called Coniah, Jeremiah 22 verse 24, 20 in verse 28 and 37 verse 1. He began ruling at 18, 2 Kings 24 verse 8. Note, there is a textual problem here, for 2 Chronicles 36 verse 9 informs us that he was 8 years old. He was an evil king. 2 Kings chapter 24 verse 9. Because of this, both Ezekiel 19 verse 5 through 9 and Jeremiah 22 verse 24 through 26 predicted that he would be carried off into Babylon captivity. He was to be regarded as childless, as none of his children would ever sit upon the throne of David or rule in Judah. The New Scofield Bible observes, this declaration does not mean that he would have no children, for in 1 Chronicles 3 verse 17 and 18 some are named. Matthew chapter 1 verse 12. By divine judgment this king was to be written childless, i.e., no physical descendant would occupy a place in the list of Israel's kings. Consequently, if our Lord Jesus, who is to occupy David's throne in Luke 1, 32 and 33, had been begotten by Mary's husband Joseph, who was of the line of Jeconiah, Matthew 1 verse 12 and 16, it would have contradicted this divine prediction. Christ's dynastic right to the throne came through his foster father Joseph from Jeconiah, but the physical descent of Jesus from David came through Mary, whose genealogy is traced to David through Nathan rather than through Solomon. Compare Luke 3:31 with Matthew 1:17. Jeconiah was captured during the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, 2 Kings 24 verse 12, and carried to Babylon along with 10,000 other Jewish captives, Jeremiah 24 verse 1 and verse 29, 2 Kings 24 verse 14 and 15. Ezekiel was also carried away at this time. He then appointed Zedekiah, Jehoiachin's great uncle, to occupy the throne of Judah, 2 Kings 24 verse 17. Jehoiachin was placed in a Babylonian prison where he remained for 36 years until the death of Nebuchadnezzar. He was then released by the new Babylonian monarch, evil Merodach, who not only freed him but gave him a seat at the king's own table and the allowance for his support, 2 Kings 25 verse 27 through 30 and Jeremiah 52 verse 31 through 34. He ruled for 3 months, 598 BC. And in Zedekiah, 2 Kings chapter 24 verse 17 through chapter 25 verse 30 and 2 Chronicles 36 verse 11 through 21. He was the youngest son of Josiah. He rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. For this he was blinded and carried off as a captive to Babylon. He ruled for 11 years, 597 to 586 BC. The spotlight or the rifle approach. And we won't be able to get but 10 minutes into this, but the chaotic kingdom stage can be best summarized by examining in some detail the lives of 20 individuals. This number does not include the writing prophets such as Jonah, whose life will be considered along with his book. Of the 20, 6 are northern rulers, 12 are southern rulers, and 2 are prophets. These are Jeroboam, Omri, Ahab, Jehu, Jeroboam II, Hoshea, the northern, Rehoboam, Asa, Jehoshaphat, Athaliah, Joash, Uzziah, Ahaz, Hezekiah, Manasseh, Josiah, Jehoiakim, Zedekiah, the southern, and Elijah, Elisha, the prophets. The important southern or northern rulers. Jeroboam was the first king. He began in 930 BC and ruled for 22 years. To properly consider the reign of Jeroboam, it is necessary to know something of the circumstances which put him into power. It all began with Solomon's arrogant young son named Rehoboam. Rehoboam come to Shechem to be crowned king over all Israel in 1 Kings 12 verse 1 and 2 and 2 Chronicles 10 verse 1. He has issued an ultimatum by a delegation led by Jeroboam, who had returned from Egyptian exile after Solomon's death, which stated simply that the people demanded a better life under him than they had known under Solomon. 1 Kings chapter 12 verse 3 and 4 and 2 Chronicles 10 verse 2 through 4. Rehoboam asked for a 3-day recess to consider their demands. During this period he consults with his arrogant young friends and, favoring their advice over the older and wiser men, reports to waiting Israel at the end of the 3-day period, "My father made your yoke heavy, and I will add to your yoke. My father also chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions." 1 Kings chapter 12 verse 14. Upon hearing this, 10 of the 12 tribes heed Jeroboam's cry to strike their tents, and Israel's sorrowful secession story has begun. 1 Kings 12 verse 16. Rehoboam's tax collector is stoned to death, and the frightened king runs for his life to Jerusalem. 1 Kings 12 verse 21 and 22. Rehoboam would continually disobey this command throughout his reign. See 1 Kings 15 verse 6. Jeroboam, the new leader of the 10-tribe confederation, is immediately faced with a serious threat. 3 times a year, as commanded by God in Leviticus 23 and Exodus 23 verse 17, the entire nation is to go to Jerusalem and worship God. Jeroboam knows the priests will doubtless use these opportunities to bring all Israel back into the fold of Rehoboam. Jeroboam therefore attempts to resolve all this by adopting a 4-fold plan. He changes the religious symbols of Israel. Instead of 2 golden cherubims above the ark, he substitutes 2 golden calves. Here he could point to the action of the first high priest Aaron for a historical example. In fact, he stole Aaron's text into introducing these calves to Israel. Compare Exodus 32 verse 4 with 1 Kings 12 verse 28. He changes the religious worship center from Jerusalem to Bethel and Dan. This is in direct disobedience to God's clear command to him in 1 Kings 11 verse 36. He degrades the Levitical priesthood by making priests of the lowest of the people which were not of the sons of Levi. Chapter 12 verse 31 of 1 Kings. Because of this, the vast majority of priests and Levites flee southward to Judah, leaving behind them a situation of near total apostasy. 2 Chronicles 11 verse 13 through 17. This explains the tragic fact that not one of the 19 Israelite kings, beginning with Jeroboam and ending with Hoshea, over a period of approximately 210 years, turned his heart and kingdom to God. He changed the religious calendar from October to November. According to Leviticus 23, Israel was to observe 6 main yearly feasts beginning in April and ending in October. These 6 feasts, 3 of which fall in October, foreshadowed the cross, unleavened bread, resurrection, first fruits, Pentecost, Feast of 50 Days, the rapture, the Feast of Trumpets, the tribulation, Feast of Atonement, and the millennium, the Feast of Tabernacles. It is evident, however, that Jeroboam has little use for any of this, for we are told that he devises this November feast after his own heart. 1 Kings 12 verse 33. Jeroboam visits the altar in Bethel to burn incense. He now becomes the second of 3 Israelite kings who dared to take upon themselves the office of a priest also. All 3 were severely punished. The other 2 were Saul in 1 Samuel 13 verse 9 through 14 and Uzziah in 2 Chronicles 26 verse 16 through 21. For his idolatry, Jeroboam is prophesied against and punished by a man of God. The prophecy that years later a king of Judah named Josiah would totally destroy Jeroboam's false religion, even burning the bones of his dead priest upon the very altar where Jeroboam stood sacrificing. This amazing prophecy was fulfilled exactly some 348 years later. Compare 1 Kings 13:2 with 2 Kings 23 verse 15 and 16. The punishment. Jeroboam's altar was destroyed and his arm was paralyzed, both supernaturally from God in 1 Kings 13 verse 3 through 6. The prophet then prayed and the king's hand was restored. On his route home, the prophet foolishly heeds the words of a lying old prophet from Bethel and thus forfeits his life for disobeying God. God had told him to return home immediately. The old Bethel prophet told him that God had changed his mind and desired him to stay and eat in Bethel. When he finally left for home, he was attacked and killed by a lion. Soon after this sad event, Jeroboam's son Abijah becomes very ill. Ahijah the prophet sadly relates God's message to Jeroboam's wife, who had attempted to disguise herself, which is that because of his extreme wickedness he will suffer terrible judgment. 1 Kings 14 verse 10 through 14. After all this, of course, did take place, and the child soon died. 1 Kings 14 verse 17. And a few years later, Nadab, Jeroboam's son, who succeeded him, was murdered along with all of his relatives by a rebel named Baasha, who took over his throne in 15 verse 29. At this time, God also issued his first chilling warning of the future Syrian captivity, which occurred 250 years later. I'm going to read that in 1 Kings. 1 Kings chapter 14 verse 15. Verse 15. For the Lord shall smite Israel, and as a reed is shaken in the water, and he shall root out Israel out of the good land which he gave to their fathers, and shall scatter them beyond the river, because they have made their groves, provoking the Lord to anger. Okay, let me get this. Chilling facts. God strikes Jeroboam with a plague, and he dies after a wicked reign of 22 years. No less than 21 times it is recorded that he made Israel to sin. He is succeeded by his son Nadab. 1 Kings chapter 14 verse 20 and 2 Chronicles 13 verse 20. Nadab was murdered by a rebel named Baasha after a reign of only 2 years. He thus became the first of 6 northern kings to be assassinated. These are Elah, Jehoram, Zechariah, Shalom, and Pekahiah. In killing him and his relatives, Baasha unknowingly fulfills the prophecy given to Jeroboam's wife by Ahijah the prophet. Compare 1 Kings chapter 14 verse 14 with chapter 15 verse 29. Omri, the 6th king. He began in 885 BC and reigned for 12 years. Omri made the city of Samaria the new northern capital. 1 Kings chapter 16 verse 24. 16 verse 24. And he sought the hill Samaria of Shemer he bought it for 2 talents of silver and built on the hill and called the name of the city which he built after the name of Shemer, owner of the hill Samaria. He was the most wicked king of the north up to that time. Chapter 16 verse 25. Ahab, the 7th king. He began in 874 and reigned for 22 years. Ahab married Jezebel and built a temple to Baal in Samaria. 1 Kings 16 verse 31 and 32. He was more wicked than his father Omri, 1633. See also chapter 21, verse 25 and 26. At the beginning of his reign, a 500-year-old prophecy is fulfilled concerning the rebuilding of Jericho, 16 verse 34, and compared with Joshua 6 verse 26. He is confronted by Elijah and warned that due to his sin and Israel's wickedness, a 3.5-year famine will occur, 1 Kings 17:1, James 5 and 17. Ahab sees his priests of Baal defeated and destroyed by Elijah on Mount Carmel, 1 Kings 18:40. He is allowed by God to defeat the arrogant Syrians on 2 occasions to prove a point, the point being that Jehovah is Lord over all, 1 Kings 20, verse 23 and 28. At this time, King Ben-Hadad of Syria declares a war on Ahab, who at first attempts to appease with a bribe to the greedy Syrian monarch. But when this fails, Ahab is determined to fight, 1 Kings 20, verse 1 through 11. A nameless prophet, perhaps Elijah, reassures Ahab of victory over the Syrians, and which victory soon takes place, 1 Kings 20, verse 13 through 19. After their defeat, the Syrians conclude it was due to a geographical factor, as the battle had taken place on hilly ground, thus giving the Israeli troops a tremendous advantage. The Syrians believed that the God of Israel was a hill god. Plans were then made to fight again, but this time they would meet Israel on the plains. They could not have been more mistaken. Israel's God is indeed the God of the hills, but he is also the God of the valleys. Exodus 17 verse 8 through 13 and 1 Samuel 17 verse 3 and verse 49. Exodus 17 verse 8 through 13, when Joshua and Aaron and Hur held up Moses' hand while Joshua fought the Amalekites. And in 1 Samuel 17 verse 3 and verse 49, where David fought Goliath. He's the God of the mountain, 1 Kings 18 verse 19 and 40, where Elijah prayed fire down from heaven. God of the plain, Judges 11 verse 33, the God of the water, Exodus 14 verse 27 and 28, the God of fire, Daniel 3 19 through 26, 3 Hebrew children in the fire. The Syrians attack and are again soundly defeated, losing 127,000 infantrymen. The victorious Ahab disobeys God's command and spares Ben-Hadad's life, as Saul had once done with Agag in 1 Samuel 15, 31 through 33. The prophet of God then announces that because Ahab had done this, the Lord will require his life for Ben-Hadad's life, 1 Kings 20, verse 32 through 43. This will happen some 3 years later. See 1 Kings 22, verse 29 through 37. And thank you again for your consideration, time to listen to all this.